Today I'm going to talk about two different conceptions of non-being, one presented by Quine and one presented by Heidegger. First, I'll provide some general background information about the different philosophers and their notion of metaphysics that they employ in their philosophies. And then I'll delve into kind of the more central issue of their very radically different conceptions of non-being. Um, Quine was an American analytic philosopher and thought that science was the best theory of knowledge that we have as of yet developed, and therefore our account of metaphysics should be developed in accordance with science and in accordance with scientific discoveries. He had a very simplistic understanding, or relatively simplistic understanding of being. To be, for Quine, is to be the value of a variable. And that ultimately reduces all of the problems within metaphysics to two primary problems, which are what objects do those variables range over, and what sorts of primitive predicates can we attribute or admit to those objects. So really, it's kind of squashing things down to very, very straightforward and precise problems, which is how Quine likes things. Um, Heidegger, in contrast, was a German continental philosopher and was author of arguably one of the most important philosophical texts of the 20th century, Being and Time, a text that spurred the development of a bunch of different schools within philosophy, Sartre's existentialism, Gadamer's hermeneutics, and Derrida's deconstructionism. Heidegger is associated typically with uh, the existentialist and phenomenology schools of philosophical thought. Um, Within his philosophy and his writing, Heidegger placed heavy emphasis on the role of the questioner, or Dasein, the mode of being that we as humans participate in philosophical inquiry, and how we humans, or Dasein, as questioners, imposing the question of our own being, encounter ourselves as those beings for whom our being matters, or our being is a question. And so, now to get down into the nitty gritty of the issue, I'll first address how Quine conceives of non being, and then I'll address how Heidegger conceives of it, and then at the end, I'll provide a brief sort of summary of how they kind of clash. So for Quine, non-being is something that shouldn't be talked about, and it's only possible to talk about it by using imprecise or confused language. For Quine, ontology is concerned with only what there is, and so talk of anything that is non-existent or non-being is really just not possible for him, or not kosher, so to speak. And the way the problem of non-being is a very old metaphysical and philosophical problem. It has acquired the name Plato's beard because it's so hard to get yourself out of once you start talking about things that are non-existent. You kind of find yourself getting tangled up in all of the language that we use in talking about them. But Quine posed a solution that by demarcating between the meaning of terms and the objects to which those terms name, or the objects which those terms name, we can rid ourselves of the confused talk of non-being. So to use Quine's example that he provides us in his text, he uses Pegasus. And so we can demarcate between the meaning of the term Pegasus, that is, the qualities that we would associate with the term Pegasus, i.e., having two wings, being a white horse, belonging to Hercules, things like that. Properties that we associate with the term Pegasus but don't correspond to any particular object. And so we can comfortably discuss those properties, the meaning of the term Pegasus, without positing that there is a Pegasus there in the world. And so, in short, talk of non-being is a minor linguistic problem that will eventually be ruled out once we stop talking confusedly about non-being. In contrast, Heidegger conceives of non-being in a very different way. What Quine calls non-being, Heidegger refers to as nothingness, and it plays a critical role in his philosophy and how we understand the world as humans, or as Dasein. Nothingness represents those ways of being that are so radically different from our own and therefore inconceivable to us, the ultimate form of which is death. And so Heidegger has this chapter in Being and Time that is entitled Beings Towards Death, and this is how he conceives of humans. We are beings towards death, and the death marks the end of our being, and so we are constantly trying to grapple with this notion of non-existence, that we are inevitably going to die, and that forces us into this constant sense of anxiety, and we're forced to grapple with this issue again and again throughout our lives, and we can never really get a handle on it completely because the idea of non-existence is just not something we can conceive of. And there are more minor cases of nothingness, arguably. We can talk about nothingness manifesting itself in just modes of being that are radically different from the way we are currently living our lives. You know, like if I were to find out that I'm going to have a child soon, that would be in a sense encountering the nothingness. I would have to completely re-examine how I conceive of myself, my values, what I'm doing with my life, how I approach even just basic everyday tasks. I would all just become completely different, and they'd all be thrown back into question. Things that I normally wouldn't have any problem with would all of a sudden be subject to doubt because I am encountering this completely new mode of being that I have trouble conceiving of, and that I know that I must encounter. So, in short, nothingness fills us with anxiety relative to that which we do not know or understand, the ultimate form of which is death, and we are throughout our lives, we constantly are forced to grapple with the idea of our own non-existence after our death. And the relationship of ourselves as Dasein to nothingness plays a critical role throughout Heidegger's philosophy. And it's this driving, ever-present sort of problem that we have to grapple with as finite beings. So in short, Quine and Heidegger have very radically different conceptions of non-being. For Quine, it's a minor linguistic issue that can be resolved with some careful dissection of the way we use terms. For Heidegger, it's kind of this essential force or like essential difference between the way we are as Dasein and the way we will eventually be as dead. And so there's a surprising contrast between the two, and I feel like it's very interesting to consider them both in conjunction because they definitely represent two completely different approaches to philosophy and two different approaches to this metaphysical issue, and so I found it very interesting.